Now during the water change, you definitely want to keep an eye on the temperature. So this temperature is at about 24 degrees. So it's just a little bit on the cool side. Most plant tanks tend to be more like 26 to 28. So we're going to want to be very conscious not to drop the temperature during this water change. Otherwise the fish will end up with white spot. So we'll probably just keep a real eye on the water that's going in, and just keep the water a little bit on the warm side, because we'd rather the temperature go up a little bit than down a little bit, because when you go down a little bit, that's when you end up with white spot. And particularly with fish like the rainbow fish, big water changes in temperature, they tend to get affected very, very easily. I've been keeping an eye on the temperature. The water in this new water, the temperature of this new water is 26 degrees, which is slightly warmer than the tank. I'm going to add a tiny little bit of prime to this water to make sure that there's no chlorine going in the water. But once again, it would be my preference for future reference to use RO water for top-ups and for water changes. Now it's time to clean the filter. A good little tip is every single time you unplug something, put it outside the cabinet. Therefore, you will not be tempted to not plug it back in. It's very easy to unplug something, leave it dangling there, miss it and forget to plug it back in. Not plugging something back in can be very, very bad. So try and make sure your leads are long enough to just drop them out the front here. That way you can't close the door unless you plug them back in. That way you're going to make sure you do plug them back in. So what I'm going to do now is clean this filter. The first thing is that this filter has a strainer. I'm going to clean the strainer because the strainer is completely clogged. The strainer must be cleaned to let the good water into the filter. Then I'm going to clean the filter using water from the fish tank, not water from the tap. The way that I take this filter out is I unplug it. I put the lead at the front. Then I'm going to shut those taps off. Then I'm going to open this up, and that will allow me to pull the filter out, and I can take it to a wet area to clean it, not using tap water. This is a strainer, which is on the inlet of the filter. Now, if this strainer is kept nice and clean, it's very valuable because it will help stop junk getting into the filter and clogging the filter up. On the other hand, if this strainer is completely full of crap and it's really dirty, then it's going to be a negative to the tank. So if you have a pre-filter strainer and it's nice and clean, because you're cleaning it regularly, it's doing a good job. If you have a pre-filter strainer and you're never cleaning it, it's not helping you. So in regards to supplies, the one thing I'd like to add is a little bit of GH powder. So looking through the cupboard, what we have here is some prime. I would much rather use RO water for this tank than prime. Once again, if the tank is not overly stocked with fish and you're lucky with your tap water, you can get away with it, but it does depend on your tap water. Tap water isn't always the same from one area to another, and it isn't always the same from one time to another. So RO water is definitely a safer option than using Waterager. We've got some iron. I have already added that. Once again, you can test your iron, which is the good way of going about it, but you can also look at the color in the leaves. So ongoingly, I don't think this tank has had an iron problem because the tank has only recently been left, and the plants don't look overly yellow. They're a little bit on the yellow side. So I think the normal maintenance of this aquarium would have probably been adequate. But if that was not the case, you'll see the leaves go yellow, in which case you need to increase the iron. I would like to see a GH buffer because I'd like to make sure the GH is not 0. Once again, I do not want a high GH. Now, I have added a little bit of Algae Fix just to help clean up the algae. Once again, there's no point using Algae Fix if you haven't fixed your problem. Otherwise, you kill the algae off, then the algae is likely to come back again. Also, don't use any of these sorts of chemicals when you've got activated carbon in the filter because it'll just suck it straight out. I've not added this one because I never want to add 2 algae products on the same day. I would rather increase the quality of the food. This is okay, but I would be going for a less processed food, such as Spectrum's probiotics, and I'd be mixing that with Danichi because that's my favorite food. Dainichi Color, I think, is just an amazing food. Now we've got some buffer here. The buffer is used to raise the KH. In this case, the KH is 4, which I'm very happy with, but you can never, never, never want to run a CO2 system with a 0 KH. Otherwise your pH can just bomb out. But I do have a feeling that too much of this has actually been added, because the pH of this tank is surprisingly high. I've also found some fungus cure, and I would only be using fungus cure if I had an absolute reason for it. It is good to have medications on hand, because Murphy's Law says you need them when you can't get them. But the main medication that I like to have on hand for the sake of Murphy's Law is White Spot Remedy, because particularly after a large water change, or if your heater gets unplugged, or there's many reasons why the fish may stress and end up with white spot. And white spot is typically very easily treated if treated quickly. If you allow the white spot to get worse, then you can start losing fish. Now, the first thing you're going to see with white spot is flicking and scratching. If the fish look uncomfortable in the water, that may be a sign of white spot. If they're breathing heavily, and then ultimately if they get little white spots on them. So white spot is very easy to cure. So having a little bit sitting in the cupboard is something I'd highly recommend. Now, cleaning this filter, when it goes to taking the head off, it's really important that you open up the tap, because you need to allow the pressure to be gone. If your taps are closed and you try to open that up, it's like trying to open up a vacuum. It is a vacuum, which doesn't work. So open the tap up, you can then pull that off. Then you can open your clips up. Then you take the top off. In this case, there's a grid that needs to be legs up like this. Underneath that is some filter wool that was absolutely putrid. I would way rather use poly filter than filter wool. And then there's some biological filter material here. It's the nitrifying filter material. I would way rather replace that for Marine Pure, because Marine Pure will contain parallel denitrification and help to reduce your nitrates, which will also help to reduce your algae. So what I'm going to do next is clean it all in water that I've removed from the tank. Then I'm going to put it all back again, put some new filter wool back on top, and away we go. Now, in the old days, we used to separate the noodles at the bottom from your other media towards the top. I'm not really of the belief that that does much anymore. I'm really not a fan of these medias anymore at all, because these medias are purely just nitrifying, which means they're just going to grow bacteria on the outside of them, which breaks ammonia into nitrate. So therefore something you don't want into something else that you don't want. If you did not clean this filter regularly at all, then separating the smaller surface area media to the larger surface area media has a little bit of relevance. But if you clean the filter a little bit more regularly and you're a little bit more onto it, and it's not clogging up too much, it would make absolutely no difference. And it would be my preference to systematically over time convert that media to a more advanced media, such as Marine Pure, just because over a period of time I definitely get a better result from Marine Pure, and it is a one-off purchase. The Marine Pure has a certain surface area to volume ratio that allows the formation of denitrifying bacteria. You'll find that most other medias on the market just copy Marine Pure, and they do not have the correct surface area to volume ratio, and they are a sales pitch. They are not scientific evidence. The company that did all the research into Marine Pure was a company called Nanodynamics for the wastewater industry, and basically millions of dollars was poured into that, and that's way beyond the R&D budget of the collective aquarium industry. So I just stick with Marine Pure. That's what I get the best results from. So this job is all done now. When I came in, the tank had been badly left due to the owner being away. And the temperature of this tank was sort of 24 degrees, which is totally fine, but just a little bit on the cool side. I've been very conscious of temperature during the water change, and it is currently 25. So I'm happy with that. but I would suggest the idea of maybe turning the heater up just a little bit. It's currently set on just over 24, which means that I would assume that the heater is actually working quite effectively. But I would consider just turning it up just a little bit and just monitoring the results there. But all in all, this service has gone exceptionally well. The fish look very, very good. The water quality has tested up very well. The pH is on the high side, which is something I'm concerned about, but it may just be that too much of that African KH buffer was added, which I'm not totally worried about. That'll probably come down relatively quickly. Then we're going to return in a couple of weeks and do another service. It obviously will not take as long as this one because we're going to be starting from a much better base, and then the owner will return and the servicing will go back to normal, and this aquarium will very quickly return to its former glory. But one thing that I would be highly recommending is adding polyfilter to the filter, and I would be considering doing systematic little gravel cleans where you can, just because I'm very worried about the amount of crap that's in this gravel. And the other thing that you could consider doing, but it would just be a consideration, is a spring clean. Now, what happens with an aquarium is, it's my belief that you set it up and for 1 year you'll love it, then 1 year you'll like it, and then 1 year you've seen it. So if you've had your aquarium looking the same for several years, sometimes one of the best things to do is a spring clean. Now, what you do with a spring clean is basically remove some water, then you take all the fish out, then you take all the plants out, then you replace or clean the gravel. If this is fertilizer gravel, you probably would not do that. And then you just do it all completely differently, get some new plants, change some of your fish, change your rocks, and you just make it completely different. Now, the main reason why you're doing that is that when you do change it around, completely re-aquascape the tank and change some fish, you find that it completely reinvigorates your interest in the tank. So it's all very good to say, oh, you shouldn't do that, and the fish will be very established as they are, and as true as that actually is. But I do find that your interest in the aquarium is basically in the fish's best interest. If your tank has looked the same for a long, long time and you find you're not excited about it anymore, you're not running home to look at it anymore, then you're probably not going to be looking after it as well. If you've changed some stuff around and you've reinvigorated your own interest, not only have you maximized the value of your aquarium, but it gets you back involved and interested and back into your hobby again. So it's very common that I'll be involved in a customer, and at the start they're all super excited and they're doing everything they need to do. Then over a period of time, they've sort of seen it now, and then they start not doing what they need to do anymore because they're just not spending the time with it, because they're just not getting the interest out of it anymore. And that, I think, is a completely normal and human thing. So don't beat yourself up if that happens. Just give the tank a spring clean, give it a bit of a change, and then you'll find you're right back into it again. So 1 year you love it, 1 year you like it, then you've seen it. That's sort of what I've concluded. But just don't ask me for marriage advice.